Calzan sighed, the sound taking up the small metallic booth of an escape pod. Describing today as a bad day might be like describing space, the dark void in which the pod sat, as a bit big. 7. 7 damn cycles saving every last credit to go on a galactic cruise and find new beauty in the galaxy, as their slogan went. The huge, furry red alien squashed into the seat at his left, sent vibrations through the seat frame, as he let out a of sorrowful flatulence, before going back to his constant high-pitched sobbing that shook the chairs almost as much. The pod was circular and uncomfortably small, a ring of chairs squished together with a central viewing orb at the center. In each of the other 6 seats sat an alien, each of a different species. Calzan tried to desperately get back to his previous train of thought. At this point, self-pity felt preferable to the cruel assault on his senses the small pod offered. Pirates suck. He had read several novels in his younger days about brave and handsome pirates going on adventures and engaging in all kinds of daring feats of heroism. Books lie. Pirates were mean and ugly, and the hygiene left much to be desired. Any author that wrote about pirates deserved something. He wasn't sure what they deserved, but whatever it was unpleasant. His train of thought was disturbed, this time by the insectoid creature in the seat to his right. It had once again taken a deep breath and began what he could only assume was a prayer to its gods. The insectoid's carapace clicked and clacked as he repeated complex hand gestures alongside his prayer. The pod lacked a translator, and none of the aliens aboard seemed able to speak another's language. Calzan was pretty sure even if he couldn't understand the alien, he could repeat the short prayer sound for sound at this point, as the alien had repeated it again and again and again and again for the last 8 hours, stopping only at the end of every prayer to take a breath. Why did the pirates have to target his cruise out of all the possible spaceships in the galaxy? And why did he have to have ended up in this tiny tin can of an escape pod with the 6 most annoying aliens in the galaxy, doomed to drift until they died of asphyxiation in the cold, lonely depths of space? The central screen orb beeped in warning, letting the pod's occupants know they only had 4 hours of air remaining before they would begin to drift off into oxygen-starved death. Calzan tried to avoid the dark feeling of his impending demise that lurked in the back of his mind, instead focusing on one of the aliens across from him in the circular space. It was small, not even 2 meters tall and thin to the point where he would have described it as gangly. Its hairless skin was a rich brown, its head topped with long black braided hair. He wasn't familiar with the species, unlike the creature that sat next to it, an Uxan. The Uxan seemed to mistake itself as the target of Calzan's lingering gaze. It burbled happily in the language of its kind, shifting its pus-covered form uncomfortably in its seat. It gestured towards the screen orb before making several lewd and suggestive gestures that broke more yellow scabs in its form, sending new waterfalls down its loose skin. Calzan shivered involuntarily at the Uxan's unambiguous offer. There was no hope of rescue. The escape pod had been jettisoned in deep space, and it was only designed for in-system rescue. If they were lucky, it would maybe only be a few thousand years before they were discovered, but with their air supply measured in hours, their fate was sealed. Calzan briefly wondered if there was some way of ending it all sooner. He was in the waiting room of hell. Sadly, he knew the cramped craft had been designed to be idiot-proof, and escape was impossible. There was a rustling from a cage in the hands of an alien sitting on the other side of the dark-skinned alien. This alien was the smallest of them all, and he had boarded the escape pod with a pet carrier, with some manner of vicious beast inside. Whatever fate had befallen the little alien, and its malicious cage companion, before making it to the escape pod, had damaged the locking mechanism on the cage, and it was only kept shut by the bloodied hands of the small alien. The imprisoned creature seemed to take great exception to being inside his cage, and had bitten Yao for hours, pounding on the cage doors, and giving his jailer their bloody hands. The cage was small enough that Calzan was convinced the little monster wasn't a threat to life, but it was clearly in a bad mood, and had no reluctance to inflict injury. Every time he heard the rustling, he wondered if now was going to be the moment it broke free. What really worried him, though, was the last member of their little band of misadventure. This alien was gaunt in the extreme, all muscle and bone. He'd been the last one on board the pod. Calzan was almost positive that this was one of the pirates who, in a drug-addled haze, had boarded the pod by mistake. The probably pirate moved in stuttering explosive movements that seemed too fast for Kazan's eyes to process, followed by long moments where it seemed almost statue-like, as it stayed unnaturally still. After the pod had launched, it had spent several minutes banging on the roof hatch before sitting down dejectedly in its seat and pulling out a large bag of what Kazan could only assume were drugs, individually portioned into at least 20 doses, and consuming them all in rapid succession. This caused its already large eyes to dilate to the point they looked like tall pools of the darkest water on a sea of red. The probably pirate had then sat there unmoving for hours. Just as Kazan had been convinced that the probably pirate was dead, it had, in its sudden movement, pulled out a large knife that was clearly designed to intimidate and maximize suffering rather than for more practical purposes. It now sat there, completely unmoving, except for his wrist, as it moved it back and forth with timing, as consistent as the timing of a clock, his eyes fixated on the light dancing on his malicious blade. Here he was, hours left to live, no sobbing family to grieve his passing, no heroic and meaningful death, no life well lived, just a one-way trip to the afterlife with the worst companions the galaxy could have possibly provided. A meaningless, unhappy death, and a cold, empty void. He noticed the dark-skinned alien opposite him reach into a bag and pull out a stick. It gently placed the stick to his lips and blew a few times, producing a reedy, whistling sound. What new suffering does this alien bring? Kazan wondered, if getting the probably pirate to stab him to death would be the preferable outcome at this point. The stick-wielding alien gave a slightly apologetic look towards Kazan, seeming to realize his dislike of its random whistles, then began gently dancing his fingers along the stick as it blew on it. It took Kazan a moment to register what he was hearing. Instead of the constant painful whine he was expecting from the whistle, there was instead a gentle weaving of sound, something unlike anything he had ever even imagined, never mind heard. The sound gently lifted and danced in an ever-changing rhythm. It was like poetry without words. It took his breath away. He noticed the sobbing alien next to him had begun to ease its tears in wonder. The obsessive prayer next to him grew quiet. Even the probably pirate suddenly sheathed his knife and stared in his wide-eyed way at the alien. A calm came to the beast in the cage, just as it came to the captains of the pod. Kazan began to feel something from the noise. It spoke to him, even though he used no words. It spoke of the sorrow and the pain all aboard felt, their loss and suffering, their fear and pain. Even though none on board shared a language, the strange little creature with its stick of rhyming sound spoke to them without words. Kazan didn't have a word for this beautiful amalgamation of sounds. The alien's hands flew gracefully along the tube into which it gently blew. Kazan felt lucky that in his dying moments he had discovered this new beauty in this strange alien and the magical sounds that it seemed able to conjure from its very soul. Time passed, and the inevitable happened, but right to the end, Kazan smiled at the beauty he heard.